We'll move on to our next speaker, and that's Jim Chung, and he will talk to us about digital astrophotography with a phase one medium format camera. Jim, come on over.
Well, I'd like to thank everybody for coming out tonight. For me personally, it's very gratifying to be back. So this is digital astrophotography with a phase one monochrome medium format camera. Everybody hear me okay? Excellent. Yeah, so in the beginning of the film era, there were these things called medium format film cameras. And many of you will recognize the names of the manufacturers: Hasselblad, Yashica, Rolleid. And these medium format film cameras use medium format film, which is a lot bigger than the 35 millimeter film, which I think most of you are most familiar with. So how did it be that 35 millimeter film became the standard for what it is? A couple of reasons. Movie and filmmakers use 35 millimeter film, so it's readily available. When Leica made their first camera in 1927, it used 35 millimeter film, and it spawned a whole generation of compact cameras. And in 1934, Kodak made the 35 millimeter film canister, which made the film really easy to handle. It's robust, and it could carry up to 36 exposures per roll. But even back in the 30s, there were naysayers. So they said things like serious photographers would never, ever use these compact cameras. And now that the cameras were so common, everybody wanted to be a photographer. And you just can't get clear or sharp images with these compact 35 millimeter cameras. Well, the funny thing is, a century later, they're saying the exact same thing about smartphone cameras. So just like film cameras, digital cameras have their different sizes of imaging sensors that they use. Relative to a Canadian dime, a medium format digital camera has a sensor this big. A full frame digital camera, which is the type you find from high-end Nikon, Canon, or Sony cameras, is this big. And it's actually the same dimensions as a 35 millimeter film negative. I like to use Olympus cameras, and they use micro four thirds sensors, which are slightly smaller than APS sensors, which you'll find in mid-level Canon, Nikon, and Sony cameras again. And finally, smartphone cameras are this small. So I think it's pretty intuitive to conclude that smartphone camera sensors can never equal the performance of a medium format sensor. When you have a sensor that large, you can put a lot more pixels on it, so that automatically increases the resolution of that sensor. Or you could populate that sensor with large pixels, which means it becomes more light sensitive. And it also reduces the noise that's generated by the electronics of the sensor, so you get a cleaner image. But like all technology, sensors are improving all the time. There's something called computational photography, where you harness the computing power of the camera body to actually improve the image. So all these things conspire to reduce the gap in performance between sensor sizes, to the point where it really doesn't matter how big or how small your sensor really is. So why even do medium format astrophotography? Well, the larger the sensor, the larger field of view that it covers, and the cosmos is obviously a very big place. The larger sensor, the larger the pixels could be, so it's more sensitive to low light. And again, the cosmos is a very dim place. Most serious astrophotographers use monochrome cameras because the resolution of a monochrome camera is higher than its equivalent color camera. And the monochrome camera is also well suited for using narrowband filters, which allow you to image deep space objects or within the city, regardless of light pollution. So just a quick refresher course. Narrowband filters are those filters that pass a very narrow bandwidth of light, typically at a wavelength associated with light that's emitted from excited hydrogen and oxygen atoms in a nebula. So it turns out there's only one company in the entire world that makes a medium format monochrome camera. That's phase one from Denmark. I picked up this used IQ260 achromatic off eBay. There's three main components to the camera. The lens, of course. The body contains the battery, the shutter, all the exposure controls, and the digital back is what contains the actual sensor, its electronics, and a little view screen on the back. So the sensor is a 60 megapixel CCD made here locally by Teledyne DALSA in Waterloo. Because it's monochrome, it has no anti-aliasing filter and no infrared cutoff filter, and it stores its images as 16-bit lossless raw files. Introduced in 2013 for the price of 45,000 American dollars. And I did not pay anything close to that. I let depreciation accrue for almost a decade. And I am also the son of immigrant parents who taught that frugality is a virtue. I'm sure many of you. So the camera is huge, it's heavy, it's really meant for studio work, but you can use it in the field. I caught this guy in the wild with a 300mm lens attached to the phase one body. It was quite an experience. The shutter of the camera is extremely loud, and that's what alerted the beaver to my presence. He heard the camera, he looked up, he saw me, and he instantly dove to the bottom of the stream. Not before he warned his friends by slapping the surface of the water with his tail. So if you can think of the shutter sounding like a gunshot in the quietness of the wilderness, his tail slap was like a thunder slap, or a thunder strike, I should say, in a storm. This is the Suncor fuel depot, located at Keele and Finch in the city. It contains enormous reserves of gasoline, diesel, furnace oil, ethanol, and tankers go in and out all day long, transporting fuel to gas stations in the GTA and abroad. Staying with phase one as well. So this is known as an ISO 12233 resolution chart. They use this chart to test contrast and sharpness of an optical system. So the way it works is you adjust your distance until the chart fills the entire field of view of your optics. You take an image. Software will analyze that image at various points and quantify the contrast and sharpness at those points. And it produces what's known as an MTF graph. And that's what it looks like. I stuck one of my Olympus cameras into the back of my 4-inch astrophysics refractor. On the y-axis, you got 0 to 100% measuring contrast or sharpness. On the x, you got from the center of the sensor to the very edge of the sensor. The red reflects contrast performance, and it's referred to as MTF 10. And the green reflects sharpness, which is MTF 30. So you can see that the contrast and the sharpness are fairly even across the entire breadth of optics. And the slight wiggleness, I guess, of the curves just reflects minor field curvature error in the optics. Unfortunately, this graph is a little bit deceptive because the micro four thirds sensor is quite small, so it's only looking at the center part of the entire optics of the telescope. If you attach the much larger phase one, this is what you get. So you can still see that in the center at the far left, contrast and sharpness is really good, but it falls precipitously as you approach the peripheral edge of the optics. So does that mean that this telescope is no good? Not at all. Astrophysics Traveler is a renowned hand-built telescope. It's been optimized for center performance at the expense of peripheral coma and field curvature error, which is fine because when you're looking at an object through a telescope, you're just concentrating on what you see in the middle of the field anyway, so you don't really care what's going on in the periphery. But this graph does point out two important facts. If you want to image with a medium format camera, number one, you've got to have a draw tube that's big enough to prevent vignetting of the image. Most amateur refractors only have a 2-inch diameter draw tube. The astrophysics has a 2.7-inch diameter draw tube, because even back in the 90s when the scope was made, it was designed so that people could use medium format film cameras to image. And they also made a companion field flattener to help improve peripheral edge performance as well. Unfortunately, this field flattener must be really well made because in the history of Astromart, Cloudy Nights, or even Astrobisal, nobody has ever sold one of these used. So I can't even find one to buy. But there are some workarounds. So these are all the little components and adapters you need to connect your camera to your field flattener to your telescope. Some of these you can buy off the shelf, but typically you have to go see your local machine shop and have them custom made. It's not the time to economize. You should seek the professionals for this type of thing because you want to make sure these adapters are made accurately so they fit properly and they're secure. You're hanging a very heavy and expensive camera off the back of your telescope and pointing at all sorts of different degrees of elevation. So component 2 here houses this screw-in hydrogen alpha filter. Most filters for astronomy, again, max out at 2 inches or about 50 millimeters. I had this custom made by Omega Optics. It's a 65 millimeter wide filter. Number 5 is the actual field flattener. It's a 2-element field flattener made by Stellarvue. It's an American telescope company. And when all the pieces go together, there it is connected to my astrophysics telescope. The silver part is the draw tube of the telescope itself. So, this is an image of the North American Nebula and the Pelican Nebula, taken on a very warm 23 degrees Celsius summer night. It represents 30 2-minute unguided exposures stacked together and with dark frame subtraction. And it's still very noisy. And that's pretty typical for CCDs of this era. It's also not very sensitive because you can barely see the North American Nebula. You can make out the outline, but the Pelican is completely undiscernible. And that's okay because phase 1 never intended for this telescope or for this camera to be used in this type of application. So just to make sure that it wasn't the fault of the hydrogen alpha filter, I redid everything with the same filter, same telescope. I used my Canon T2i DSLR, 30 2-minute unguided exposures. So, the dark frame subtraction completely cleaned up the image, and it shows a lot of detail. And you can see that the smaller Canon sensor only shows a small field of view compared to the much wider field of view from the medium format camera. Fortunately, there's a new model called the IQ4. It has a 150 megapixel CMOS sensor, which probably means it has better low light performance, lower noise, so it probably works better for astronomy. But I will not be buying one anytime soon. Because I recently acquired this Lamborghini Countach That's me, spending a day skiing at St. Louis Woods over the past Christmas break. And if you have any questions, thank you very much.
Any more questions? I have a question to myself. What prompted you to purchase this camera in the first place? What was the goal?
Oh, I think it's everybody's, or every photographer's dream to have a phase one monochrome camera. That's the goal. But I wanted to see if it would work for Astro.
Okay, very good. Any questions online for Jim? Okay, we're checking on that.
Any questions?
Yeah. So we got a question, how do you connect medium format cameras to telescopes and vice versa? How do you connect medium format lenses to astro cameras?
Oh, well, if you're lucky, there'll be pre-made adapters to allow that to happen. If you're not so lucky, then you have to get one custom made at a machine shop, which I think is probably the answer that questioner is asking for.
One more question, I guess. Have you tried this camera out with the lens that came with it, and what kind of results would you get if you were to use this in a piggyback kind of scenario as opposed to a through the telescope scenario?
Yeah, I mean, it'd probably be very similar. I just don't think this sensor is really made for low light, long exposure applications, unfortunately.
Where do you go with those?
Just one final closing statement from me, if that's all right. Full disclosure, I'd like to remind everybody that I am the son of immigrant parents, and I would never spend that much money to buy a car, despite the fact that I love cars. I do own this Lamborghini, but it's not what you think. It's not photoshopped. If you're curious on how this photograph was done, you can check out my blog, jimchungblog.com. Thanks very much.
All right, great. Thank you very much, Jim. And he leaves us with a little bit of intrigue. Now we're going to have to go look this up. Good. All right. Thank you for bringing this to our attention, Jim. I had never heard of phase one before, so now I have, and I guess maybe we have either.